My son raised his glass in front of 200 people and said he hated my last name. The room burst into laughter while I silently counted every syllable of his shame. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was discovering how much they enjoyed seeing it that night. As they applauded his joke, I decided I would never again be the man they thought they could walk all over. Before we continue, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Hit the notification bell because we have new stories every day. Leave your like and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. My name is Robert Miller. I'm 65 years old, and until that Saturday, June 22nd, 2024, I thought I understood the weight of a name I had carried with pride. Even though it came stitched to poverty, I've been a carpenter since I was 18. A man who measures the world with the same tape he uses for lumber, who trusts the level of a square and the straightness of a conscience that doesn't bend even if the wood splinters. Maybe that's why when my son Adam Miller raised his glass in the ballroom of the Grand Hotel and said with a smirk that many mistook for wit, "I always hated having this last name," I didn't lose my composure. Not even when the joke was met with a collective laugh that echoed off the crystal chandeliers like invisible pebbles. Because instead of reacting with anger, I did what I do best. I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and let my memory file away every detail so I could later understand exactly how to respond. The ceremony had been at 5 in the afternoon at St. Lawrence Church, bright and solemn. I had clutched a folded funeral card in my hands bearing the name of Linda Scott, my wife, Adam's mother, who passed away in March 2023. I've kept it in my pocket since the burial like a sewn-in talisman. I thought of her when the master of ceremonies handed the microphone to my son. Linda would have smiled with those dark eyes that crinkled when she laughed. She would have put her hand on my forearm if she had sensed the shipwreck that was coming. She would have known how to read that shadow of nervousness at the corner of Adam's lips, that gesture inherited from me, that gives him away when he's about to say something he can't back up later. I thought about how we had raised him between double shifts and notebooks full of homework in the old neighborhood, when every dollar was counted in a low voice, and the refrigerator whistled at night because its motor was failing. I wondered where along the path the compass had gone wrong. In which hallway of his consulting firm he began to believe that the Miller name was a stone in his shoe. Adam spoke of love, of the fortune of finding Chloe Sullivan, of the patience she had shown with his endless work days. Then, with the room swaying with easy emotion, he threw the line like a dart wrapped in gift paper. I always hated having this last name. I was embarrassed by it in college, and it weighs on me every time I sign it. Today, by getting married, I feel like I can finally leave it behind. It was then I heard the laughter from a table in the back, his colleagues from New York, unmistakable in their shiny suits. I saw Chloe's fingers tighten on her bouquet. She didn't laugh, but she didn't intervene either. Some of Linda's relatives turned toward that table, confused. An aunt of mine put her hand to her chest, and another began to cut into the flan that had been served too early, as if the dessert could absorb the bitterness. I didn't get up. I didn't make a scene. I just rested my fingertips on the tablecloth. I aligned the knife with a napkin and took note of the silence from those who knew, who had paid for every one of Adam's notebooks, every bus ride to school, every pair of shoes when his growth spurts hit. My trade taught me that impulse is a poor advisor, and that beams not faced with patience eventually give way. In the midst of the noise, I noticed small details. The photographer focused more on the table of New York friends than on the family. Chloe's grandmother corrected a grandchild who said, "How funny." My workshop neighbor, Larry Parrish, squeezed my shoulder as he passed. A light touch that said, "I'm here," without words. And I remembered March, the papers I signed when I paid off the last debt on the workshop on Ferry Street, and the notebook where I write down every order. There on a page from April, there's an entry. Adam phone, said his firm asks where that last name comes from. Change the subject. I had already seen the crack, but I hadn't imagined the collapse. When the toast ended, a cousin approached with a plastic smile. "Don't take it like that, uncle. It's just young people's jokes." I answered him with a phrase my father used to repeat when humiliation disguised itself as humor. Jokes that hurt are just cowardly truths. I searched for Adam with my eyes. He was surrounded by friends, oblivious to me, as if I were just another nameless guest. At 10:30, I went out to the terrace to breathe. Chicago smelled like late spring blossoms. I turned on my phone and checked my messages. 2 clients asking for shelves. My brother-in-law sending a heart emoji for the photo of the toast. A bank notification. I put the phone away and took out Linda's funeral card. I spoke to her in a low voice. "You heard him, didn't you? Our name weighs him down." I wasn't asking for comfort. I was offering myself a purpose, to protect what we are. I returned to the ballroom when they announced the cake. Someone asked me to say a few words. I said very little. "Congratulations, kids. May life teach you to honor who you are." There was an uncomfortable murmur. I took a tiny piece of cake. I savored the sugar like someone memorizing one more detail, and I sat down next to the empty chair that Linda would have occupied. At midnight, I walked home alone down Trajan Street, carrying a box of favors, the card with misspelled names, embroidered napkins, a photo of the newlyweds. The silent city let me hear my footsteps and the murmur of my ideas, which were not of revenge, but of care. A lesson I learned sanding doors. If you push too hard, you splinter. If you pass slowly, you rescue the color. At home, I opened the green-covered notebook and wrote the date. I left 3 lines blank, because some wounds need air. And then I wrote, "Note every gesture from today on. Do not explain. Do not justify. Wait." I placed Linda's card as a bookmark and went down to the workshop because the smell of wood brings me back to myself. On the workbench rested an order for a school, a bookshelf for their library. I ran my hand along the edge and thought that this was the legacy I understood. Useful things, firm, made with patience. A late-night program was playing on the radio. A caller was talking about how last names tell stories we sometimes don't know. I smiled without humor. As I sharpened my chisel, I reviewed past scenes with Adam. The day I bought him a suit for his first interview. The night he asked me not to come to a dinner with executives. The time he corrected my pronunciation in front of his friends. I also remembered his early generosity when he used to share his sandwiches at school. Nothing ever completely disappears in a child. It just changes place. At 1:15, I closed the workshop. I made some chamomile tea and opened a box where I keep documents. Among the photographs, there was a letter from my father dated 1979. "Robert, the pride that weighs you down is the kind that looks down on others. The pride that holds your back straight, that never weighs a thing. Life, like wood, gives back the treatment you give it." The following days passed in a strange calm that reminded me of the silence before a summer storm. Adam didn't call on Sunday, as I had anticipated, nor on Monday. His silence confirmed what I already suspected. He considered the wedding episode over, a bad joke that time would erase without any need for explanation. I knew this strategy of his from adolescence. When he broke something or came home late, he would wait for the family routine to absorb the incident until it became invisible. For years, it worked because Linda would intercede with that maternal diplomacy that softens the rough edges between fathers and sons. Now, without her mediating presence, the void was more evident. On Tuesday, while I was varnishing a round table for an elderly couple from the old district, I heard the voice of my neighbor, Thomas Warner, a retired postal worker behind me. "Robert, have you seen the wedding news on Instagram?" I put down the brush and turned. Thomas was holding his phone with an awkward expression, showing me a photograph of Adam and Chloe toasting. One of the comments, signed by Michael Harris, said, "Finally, free of the carpenter's last name. Now you sound important." I wiped my hands on my apron and gave him back the phone. "Thanks for letting me know, Thomas. Some things are good to know." He nodded with the gravity of someone who understands that certain pains don't need words. That night, I opened my social media profile for the first time, practically abandoned since Linda's death. The last photograph was from February, her smiling in the kitchen, making lentils with her blue Sunday apron. The condolence comments were still there, some recent from people who had just found out. I navigated to Adam's profile with the cold curiosity of someone examining a technical document. His bio had changed, where it used to say, Adam Miller, financial consultant. It now read Adam M. Scott, senior analyst. The transformation was subtle but deliberate. He had relegated my last name to an initial and promoted his mother's to the main one. I checked his honeymoon posts from Santorini. In all of them, he was tagged as Adam Scott with no trace of the name he found so bothersome to carry. I didn't feel anger. I felt something more complex. The sadness of a craftsman who watches someone despise a piece he invested decades of work into. Because raising a child is just that, a work of precision where every gesture chisels the final result. I remembered the winter afternoons when Adam, 8 or 9 years old, would sit next to my workbench and ask me why wood had different grains. Every tree grows according to the storms it faces, I explained. The marks aren't defects. They are the story of how it survived. Now, 25 years later, he was ashamed of the grains that had shaped his character. On Wednesday, I received an unexpected call. It was Chloe, her voice tense. "Robert, I need to talk to you. It's important." We met that afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. She arrived looking worried, dressed more simply than at the ceremony. She apologized for not being in touch since the wedding, explaining that Adam had preferred to avoid communication with Chicago while they adjusted to life in New York. What she told me confirmed my worst suspicions about the evolution of my son's character. Adam had intensified his obsession with erasing traces of his family origin, even inventing false stories about his past when interacting with important colleagues. He tells them his father was a retired industrial engineer, that he grew up in a residential Chicago neighborhood. Chloe revealed, clearly uncomfortable. I've asked him several times to stop those lies, but he says they are narrative adjustments necessary for professional networking. The coldness of that expression chilled my blood. My son had turned the denial of my existence into a personal marketing strategy. But there's something more serious. Chloe continued. Last week, we went to a dinner with executives. One of them mentioned he had lived in Chicago and knew the city well. He started asking Adam details about neighborhoods, schools, specific places. Adam got very nervous and made up answers that didn't fit. The executive noticed the inconsistencies, but didn't say anything at the time. That situation had created tension in their marriage because Chloe feared the lies would end up harming Adam's career. For over an hour, Chloe confessed that she felt trapped between loyalty to her husband and the discomfort his social climbing strategies caused her. I didn't marry him for his family origin, but for who he was when I met him in Chicago. Now he seems like another person obsessed with impressing people who may not be worth the effort. She told me Adam had commented privately that he felt trapped between two worlds, his modest childhood and his professional aspirations. He says his firm has colleagues who come from families with business traditions, that when they talk about their fathers they mention university degrees, trips, investments. He feels inferior. The word echoed in the workshop like a misplaced hammer blow. My son felt inferior for being my son. I explained to Chloe that I held no resentment toward Adam, but I also couldn't pretend his words hadn't cut deep. A last name isn't just a label. It's a responsibility. It represents those who came before and commits those who will come after. If he considers it a burden, maybe it's time he learns to live without it. Chloe looked at me with a worried expression. What do you mean? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I told her the story of a client who had commissioned me to restore an 18th century table. It was rotten, paint stripped, apparently useless. I worked for 3 months to restore its dignity. When I delivered it, it shone like new. 2 weeks later, the client sold it because he decided it didn't match his new decor. Chloe understood the metaphor. And what did you do? I learned to be more selective about who I give my work to. After she left, I opened the green-covered notebook and wrote a summary of the conversation. Her visit confirmed my suspicions. Adam hadn't acted on impulse at the wedding. He had been planning this symbolic separation from his origin for some time. I understood his dilemma, but I didn't justify it. There are dignified ways to climb the social ladder without blowing up the foundations that supported you. That night before bed, I took an envelope from a drawer that had arrived in the mail 2 days earlier. It came from Boston from a law firm. I hadn't opened it yet because something inside me told me its contents would change the course of this family story that was just beginning to be written. On Thursday, I decided to open the envelope from Boston Inside was a formal letter from the law firm Jimenez and Associates, signed by a Thomas Jimenez. The contents left me motionless for several minutes. According to the document, I was the sole legitimate heir of Mr. Arthur Miller, who died on May 3, 2024, in Boston without direct descendants. The estate included real estate properties, financial investments, and business shares valued at approximately $10 million. The inheritance was conditioned only on proving my identity and my relationship to the deceased. Documentation that the firm committed to manage if I expressed interest in claiming it. I reread the letter 3 times to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. Arthur Miller was my paternal grandfather's older brother, who had immigrated to Massachusetts in 1952 to work in construction. He had founded a real estate company that prospered during the Cape Cod tourism boom, and he died single with no known children. The lawyers had taken months to locate legitimate heirs with the Miller last name. I was the only candidate who met the legal requirements established in the will. The irony was so perfect it was almost cruel. At the very moment my son was publicly disowning our last name, fate revealed to me that this name carried a family fortune he never knew. I put the letter in the desk drawer with other important documents and went back to work. I had to finish Larry's cabinets before the weekend, and concentrating on concrete tasks helped me process complex information. While planing the doors, I reflected on the implications of the inheritance. It wasn't just the money that struck me, but the confirmation that my last name had deeper roots than I had imagined. Arthur had built a business empire, created jobs, contributed to the development of the Massachusetts region. His legacy proved that the Millers could be as successful as any other family. That night, I called the Boston firm and scheduled a phone appointment with Thomas Jimenez for the following Friday. I wanted to understand all the legal details before making any decisions. I wasn't going to rush, just as I hadn't rushed to respond to the humiliation at the wedding. Big decisions required time to settle. What was clear, however, was that this revelation completely changed the perspective of my relationship with Adam. He had rejected a last name, believing it held him back. Reality would show him that he had despised an inheritance that would have transformed his life. On Friday, before the scheduled call, I stopped by the cemetery to visit Linda's grave. I told her quietly about the letter from Boston, about the conversation with Chloe, about Adam's plans to erase my last name from his identity. "What would you do in my place?" I asked the gray granite where her ashes rested. I didn't expect a supernatural answer, but the clarity that sometimes comes when we verbalize complex dilemmas. Linda had always defended Adam, even when his behavior was questionable, but she had also been firm in defending family values. I remembered her saying, "Children grow up to leave, but not to forget who raised them." The phone call with Thomas Jimenez lasted almost an hour. He explained that Arthur had been a meticulous man who had drafted his will with very specific instructions about locating heirs and managing the estate. One particular clause caught my attention. The will stipulated that only individuals who honored the Miller name with dignity and pride could inherit. It was as if Arthur had anticipated situations like the one I was experiencing with Adam. I agreed to begin the process of claiming the inheritance, but I asked for absolute discretion until I decided how to proceed. Thomas assured me of total confidentiality. As a professional, he understood that family inheritances often generate tensions that require careful management. After hanging up, I sat on the workshop bench and looked at my hands, stained with varnish and marked by decades of manual labor. These hands had built furniture, repaired homes, supported my family during difficult times. Adam had watched them work since he was little, but now he was ashamed of what they represented. Arthur's inheritance offered me the chance to show that the Miller name was not synonymous with limitation, but with the ability to generate wealth and progress. But it also presented me with a complex moral decision. Should I share this revelation with a son who had publicly renounced his part in our family history? I opened the green-covered notebook and wrote a line that summarized my state of mind. The name he rejected just became the most valuable one he has ever known. I put the pen down on the table and went for a walk through the neighborhood. The streets of the old neighborhood were quiet at that twilight hour, with neighbors watering plants on their terraces and children playing in the small square near the church. It was my world, authentic and simple, the same one Adam considered insufficient for his aspirations. As I walked, I understood that the inheritance wasn't just money. It was an opportunity to teach the most important lesson of my fatherhood, that the value of a last name isn't measured by the bank account that comes with it, but by the integrity of those who carry it. The weekend passed in a strange calm. No calls from New York, no messages of apology, no attempts at reconciliation. Adam seemed to have decided that silence was the best strategy for letting the wedding incident fade into oblivion. But I had learned something fundamental. Time doesn't erase wounds, it only turns them into scars. And if Adam wasn't prepared to learn that lesson, he would have to live without ever knowing what he had lost by despising the name that had just become the key to a fortune that would have satisfied all his material ambitions. The decision was made. I would wait. I would observe. And when the time was right, I would show him the true value of what he had chosen to reject. Curiosity about Arthur turned into a methodical investigation that filled my August afternoons. Thomas Jimenez had given me contacts of people who worked with him for decades, and each conversation revealed new facets of a man who had transformed ambition into a solid legacy. The first to meet me was James Cole, a retired architect who designed 3 of the residential buildings in Hyannisport. We met in a cafe in Boston's Beacon Hill, surrounded by the tourist bustle that fills the area in summer. Arthur was demanding but fair, James recalled, stirring his coffee. He never accepted second-rate materials, even if they cost more. He used to say that a poorly built building is a betrayal of the families who will live in it. He showed me photographs of the construction sites taken during the 70s and 80s. In several, Arthur appeared personally supervising the work, dressed in blue overalls and a white hard hat. One anecdote struck me in particular. During the construction of the most complex building, structural problems arose that required costly modifications to the foundations. Other developers would have looked for cheap fixes. Arthur halted the project for 6 weeks, hired additional engineers, and invested an extra $150,000 to ensure total safety. My name will be associated with this building for the next 100 years, he told us. I will not allow it to fall on any family. That sentence resonated in my mind like an echo of my own convictions about professional responsibility. The next testimony came from Rose Carter, an accountant who managed Arthur's finances from 1985 until his death. She received me in her modern office in the financial district, surrounded by file cabinets containing decades of business documentation. Arthur never spent money on personal luxuries, she explained, consulting old records. He lived in a modest apartment, drove functional cars, ate at simple restaurants. He reinvested his entire fortune in new projects or saved it. She showed me bank statements that proved this austerity. During years of millionaire income, his personal expenses rarely exceeded $2,000 a month. Rose told me that Arthur had established a special fund intended exclusively for locating distant relatives. Every year, he set aside $5,000 for genealogical research. He hired private detectives, consulted parish archives, paid for ads in Midwestern newspapers looking for information about the Miller family from his hometown. The search had been fruitless for decades, mainly because my grandfather had moved several times after Arthur immigrated. He became obsessed with finding worthy heirs. He said that money without family was like a river without a riverbed. The third meeting was with Stephen Moore, a construction foreman who worked directly under Arthur for 20 years. He met me at a traditional tavern in the North End, an authentic working-class atmosphere that contrasted with the elegant offices where I had held the previous meetings. Mr. Arthur never lost his working man's ways, Stephen assured me. He got up before anyone else. He was the first to arrive at the sites and the last to leave. On Sundays, he would come by to check that everything was secure. But what impressed me most was his memory for the family details of his workers. He knew our wives' names, asked about our children, remembered birthdays and anniversaries. When my youngest son had trouble in high school, he helped me find a better school and advanced the money for tuition without asking for any collateral. He recounted other similar gestures: interest-free loans for employees' weddings, medical help during family illnesses, extra bonuses when grandchildren were born. The image that emerged from these testimonies portrayed a man who had maintained his essential values despite his economic success. Arthur had been the antithesis of Adam, proud of his origins, faithful to his principles, committed to his community. The contrast pained me, but it also guided me on what kind of legacy I wanted to preserve. During the train ride back to Chicago, I reflected on the responsibility that had fallen on my shoulders. I was not simply the administrator of a fortune, but the custodian of a family legacy that had taken generations to build. Arthur had worked for 4 decades to accumulate that wealth in the hope of passing it on to descendants who would honor his effort. I got the last testimony by chance. At Boston South Station, while waiting for the express train to Chicago, I recognized an elderly man reading the newspaper on a nearby bench. It was Frank Miller, Arthur's second cousin. As I found out later, he had learned of my great-uncle's death through the local press. He was the smartest in the family, he told me when I introduced myself. He always knew he had to leave town to get ahead, but he never forgot where he came from. He wrote me long letters, telling me about his projects. He sent money when the harvests were bad, asked about all the relatives. Frank explained that Arthur's branch of the family had dispersed after the Great Depression, when economic hardship forced many young people to immigrate. We lost touch because there were no phones or good roads. But Arthur always promised he would return when he was rich to help rebuild what we had lost. Back in Chicago, I organized all the collected information into a specific folder titled Family History, Arthur Miller. I included photographs, transcribed testimonies, business documents, and approximate genealogies. It was a valuable archive that demonstrated the upward trajectory of the Millers, from Midwestern farmers to prosperous businessmen, always maintaining values of work, honesty, and personal integrity. This documentation became the basis for my next strategic decision. I didn't plan to immediately reveal the inheritance to Adam, but I did want to show him that his prejudices about our family origin lacked historical foundation. I prepared a selection of photographs of Arthur on his construction sites, press articles mentioning his successful projects, and testimonies highlighting his business reputation. The temptation to confront him directly was intense, but I resisted it for tactical reasons. First, I wanted to verify if he maintained his dismissive attitude toward our name, or if he showed signs of reflection. The most effective educational decisions require precise timing, like cuts in wood that must follow the natural grain to avoid splintering. The plan involves several sequential phases. First, silent observation of Adam's evolution. Second, evaluation of his attitude toward me and our family name. Third, a decision on whether he deserved to know about the inheritance or if he should remain permanently excluded from it. It was a process that required patience, but the deepest paternal pedagogy admits no improvisation or emotional haste. Observing Adam from a distance became an exercise in patience that tested my self-control. During September, through his social media posts, I could follow the evolution of his new married life in New York. The photographs showed dinners at elegant restaurants, visits to art galleries, weekend getaways to European cities. In all the images, he was tagged as Adam Scott, solidifying his systematic abandonment of his father's last name. His friends commented on the post with phrases like, "You've become so elegant," or, "You don't even seem like the same guy from Chicago." Observations he received as compliments. The transformation was evident. He had managed to reinvent himself as the sophisticated professional he had always aspired to be. What struck me most was the total absence of references to his family of origin. Not a single mention of Linda on the anniversary of her passing. Not a nostalgic memory of Chicago. Not even childhood photographs that could humanize his new public image. It was as if he had decided his life began when he got the job in New York and married Chloe. One afternoon in late September, while repairing an antique display case for a client from the old district, I received an unexpected visit from Paula Scott, Linda's older sister. We hadn't seen each other in months since the funeral, and her presence in the workshop surprised me pleasantly. She arrived carrying a bag of pastries from a downtown bakery. "Robert, I came to see how you are. The neighbors say you've been very quiet lately." She settled into the wicker chair that Linda used to occupy when she came down to the workshop on winter afternoons. Paula had heard rumors about Adam's behavior at the wedding, although no one had told her the full details. A cousin of Chloe's mentioned there were tensions during the toast. Is it true Adam said something inappropriate about the family? I wasn't surprised the news had circulated. Chicago is a city where family news travels faster than the L train. I explained what happened without dramatizing, with the same neutrality I would use to describe a technical problem in a piece of furniture. Paula listened in silence, gradually furrowing her brow as she understood the magnitude of the offense. Linda would have been terribly upset, she whispered at the end. She always defended Adam, even when he showed those airs of grandeur he picked up in New York. But this, she shook her head in disapproval. There are lines you don't cross, no matter how ambitious you are. During our conversation, relevant information emerged that I hadn't known. Paula kept in sporadic contact with an old coworker of Linda's, Kathleen, who now lived in New York near the neighborhood where Adam and Chloe resided. Kathleen has seen them a couple of times at the supermarket. She says Adam seems like a different person. Expensive clothes, studied manners, a more neutral accent. And what do you plan to do? Paula asked me directly. You can't just sit back after such a lack of respect. It was the question I asked myself every night before falling asleep. I answered her honestly. I'm waiting for the right moment to teach him a lesson he won't forget, but it has to be something definitive, not a temporary scolding he can ignore. During October, income from Arthur's inheritance began to accumulate in my bank accounts regularly. Each month, I received transfers for rents from the Massachusetts properties, dividends from financial investments, and profits from business shares. These were amounts that exceeded my annual income as a carpenter, but they arrived with the naturalness of someone receiving the fruits of well-managed investments. This new economic reality posed practical dilemmas for me about how to manage the wealth without altering my essential lifestyle. I decided to maintain my usual routine in the workshop, continue accepting carpentry orders, and keep living in the same modest apartment in the old neighborhood. The fortune was a pedagogical instrument, not a reason to change my personal identity. However, I began to discreetly explore options to use part of the resources for projects that would honor Linda's memory and Arthur's legacy. I contacted local charities specializing in helping families with financial difficulties, particularly those headed by carpenters, masons, or other manual laborers. In early November, I received an unexpected call that temporarily altered my plans for silent observation. It was Chloe, her voice tense and urgent. Robert, I need to talk to you. It's important. We met that same afternoon at a quiet cafe downtown. She arrived looking worried, dressed more simply than during her visit to the workshop months ago. What she told me confirmed my worst suspicions about the evolution of my son's character. Adam had intensified his obsession with erasing traces of his family origin, going to the extreme of inventing false stories about his past when interacting with colleagues or important clients. He tells them his father was a retired industrial engineer, that he grew up in a residential Chicago neighborhood, that he studied in private schools. Chloe revealed, clearly uncomfortable. I've asked him several times to stop those lies, but he says they are narrative adjustments necessary for professional networking. But there's something more serious, Chloe continued, lowering her voice. Last week, we went to a dinner with his company's executives. One of them mentioned he had lived in Chicago during the '82 and knew the city well. He started asking Adam details about neighborhoods, schools, specific places. Adam got very nervous and made up answers that didn't fit. The conversation lasted for over an hour. Chloe confessed she felt trapped between loyalty to her husband and the discomfort his social climbing strategies caused her. I didn't marry him for his family origin, but for who he was when I met him in Chicago. Now he seems like another person, all obsessed with impressing people who may not be worth the effort. As we parted, Chloe asked me not to reveal the content of our conversation to Adam. I just wanted you to know that there's someone in New York who doesn't approve of what he's doing. Linda didn't deserve for her son to go to these extremes. Her words moved me deeply because they confirmed that family values still had defenders. Back home, I updated my notes in the green-covered notebook with the information Chloe provided. Adam's behavior had evolved from simple family shame to the systematic falsification of his personal history. He wasn't just disowning his last name. He had begun to deny my existence as part of his social reinvention strategy. Arthur's inheritance now took on an almost poetic dimension. My son was lying about his origin to impress superiors who valued family status, while ignoring that he had legitimate access to a fortune that would have satisfied all his material ambitions. The irony was perfect. By despising the Miller name, he had automatically lost the right to benefit from the wealth that same name had generated that night. Before bed, I took out the yellowish photograph that Frank had shown me, a young Arthur posing with his brothers next to the family home. I studied it carefully, looking for family resemblances, imagining the conversations they might have had about the future. None of those serious-faced men could have imagined that decades later, a direct descendant would be ashamed of the name they had carried with farmer's pride. I only had to decide when and how to reveal this truth to him, so he would understand the magnitude of his mistake, preferably when it was too late to correct it. December arrived with the determination to formalize the decisions I had been maturing over months of silent reflection. Arthur's inheritance was no longer an abstract novelty, but a consolidated reality that generated constant income, providing me with the resources to materialize the most important educational project of my fatherhood. I contacted Patricia Morgan again, the lawyer who had advised on the initial process, to explore creating a charitable foundation that would channel a significant part of the estate towards specific social causes. The meeting was held in her office on a cold morning early in the month. I want to establish an institution that helps families of manual laborers, I explained as we reviewed the updated financial documents. Scholarships for the children of carpenters, masons, plumbers, electricians, interest-free loans for small family workshops, medical aid for craftsmen without full insurance. Patricia took meticulous notes evaluating the legal and fiscal viability of each proposal. It's a beautiful initiative, Mr. Miller. Have you thought about the foundation's name? I didn't hesitate. The Linda Scott Miller Foundation, in memory of my wife. It was the ultimate tribute to the one who had held our family together with unconditional love. The incorporation process required several weeks of complex paperwork. We had to draft detailed bylaws, define specific objectives, establish selection criteria for beneficiaries, and design monitoring protocols for the aid given. Patricia coordinated with notaries, tax managers, and official agencies to ensure the foundation complied with all applicable legal regulations. My role was to approve strategic decisions and provide the initial endowment, $3 million, which would generate enough interest to finance charitable activities for decades without depleting the principal capital. While the foundation's creation progressed, I maintained absolute discretion about the project. I kept working in the workshop with the same dedication as always, accepting modest orders, maintaining regular hours. The only difference was that I had begun to turn down jobs that required me to travel out of Chicago for several days, as I needed to be available for foundation-related meetings. In January 2025, the Linda Scott Miller Foundation received official authorization to begin activities. The public presentation ceremony was held in a hall at Chicago City Hall, attended by representatives from construction unions, artisan associations, and local charities. I gave a brief speech highlighting the foundation's commitment to dignifying manual labor and supporting families who, like mine, for decades, had built the city with honest effort. The local media covered the event with positive articles, highlighting the generosity of the anonymous donor who had made the initiative possible. The media impact was greater than expected. The Chicago Chronicle published an extensive report on the foundation, including photographs from the presentation where I appeared symbolically handing the first scholarship to the daughter of a retired plumber. WGN News aired a 5-minute interview on the regional news. Someone who greatly values the work of artisans decided to dedicate part of their estate to helping families like ours, I declared to the cameras. The irony of those words gave me private satisfaction. I was describing Arthur without lying while omitting crucial information. The first beneficiaries were selected according to strict criteria I had established during the preparatory meetings. 5 university scholarships for children of manual laborers with outstanding academic records. 3 interest-free loans for workshops needing to upgrade obsolete machinery. 2 medical grants for craftsmen with costly illnesses. The media echo of the foundation reached New York via social media and digital newspapers. One afternoon in February, I received a phone call I had been anticipating for weeks. It was Adam, his voice confused and slightly agitated. "Dad, I've seen news about a foundation in Chicago that helps people like us. Do you know about it?" His way of phrasing the question revealed the discomfort any topic related to our social status caused him. I replied with studied naturalness. "Yes, it's an interesting initiative. It seems there are generous people who value the work of artisans." "Do you know who funds it?" Adam insisted. "The papers say it's an anonymous donor, but it must be someone very wealthy. $3 million isn't an amount just anyone can donate." The figure had caught his attention, as was logical for someone obsessed with money and social status. "I have no idea," I lied deliberately. "I suppose there are rich people who remember where they come from and want to help families going through similar difficulties." The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Adam was processing the implications of my words, probably connecting them to his own behavior. Over the next few days, Adam sent me several WhatsApp messages asking for details about the foundation. He wanted to know the donor's name, the specific criteria for awarding aid, and the institution's future growth prospects. His questions revealed genuine curiosity mixed with something that could be interpreted as moral unease. The moment of greatest tension came when he asked me to intercede, to get him a meeting with the foundation's leadership. "Chloe and I are thinking of making a significant donation, but we'd like to speak directly with the decision maker." The request put me in a delicate position as I would have to refuse, without being able to explain the real reasons. "I don't think I have that kind of influence," I replied. "The foundation maintains strict confidentiality about its internal procedures, but you can write directly to the official address listed in the newspapers." His insistence confirmed that the charitable project had piqued his interest in an unexpected way. By the end of February, the foundation had settled into its normal operational rhythm. The offices operated from a rented downtown space near the cathedral, with competent administrative staff managing applications, evaluating cases, and coordinating aid deliveries. I visited the facility weekly to oversee activities and meet beneficiaries personally, seeing the young children of Masons enrolling in university courses, watching family workshops modernize with new machinery, hearing testimonies of gratitude from artisans who had overcome medical crises thanks to our support. All of it validated the decision to channel the inheritance toward constructive causes. During a routine visit to the foundation, the coordinator informed me of an unusual application that had arrived by mail. One Adam Miller Scott, residing in New York, was offering to volunteer for the institution's promotional activities and expressed interest in collaborating financially with its charitable projects. The letter included his professional resume, work references, and a personal statement explaining his emotional connection to the families of manual laborers. Reading the document, I smiled bitterly. My son had temporarily retrieved the Miller name to present himself to a foundation he admired, but he continued to use the Scott name in his daily professional life. That night, I wrote an entry in the green-covered notebook that summarized my feelings. Adam wants to be part of an institution funded with money from the name he rejected. The irony is perfect, but he doesn't know it yet. It's time to complete his education. The call came one day in March, exactly at 11 in the morning, as I was finishing varnishing a dining table for clients from the suburbs. It was Adam, but his voice sounded different, less confident, with a note of vulnerability I hadn't heard since his adolescence. "Dad, I need to ask you for something important," he began after the usual formal greetings. "Chloe and I are going through some temporary financial difficulties. I was wondering if you could help us with a small loan, something like $5,000. I'd pay you back in 6 months with interest." The moment I had been anticipating for months had arrived sooner than expected. I put the brush in the can and sat on the high stool I use for precision work. "What kind of difficulties?" I asked in the neutral tone I had perfected during this long family crisis. Adam took a moment to answer, as if carefully choosing his words. "The company is restructuring some departments. My position is secure, but they've cut the quarterly bonuses we were expecting. And Chloe wants to change jobs, find something more stable, but that means a period with no income from her. I listened to his full explanation without interrupting. He spoke of unexpected apartment expenses, bank loan payments that had become heavier, and the need to maintain a certain standard of living for his professional commitments in New York. He didn't directly mention the expensive dinners or weekend trips, but it was clear that the sophisticated lifestyle he had adopted had financial costs his real income couldn't comfortably sustain. I understand the situation, I replied when he finished. But I have a question. Why are you coming to me? As I understand it, you prefer to keep your distance from your family origins. I wouldn't want asking your father, the carpenter, for help to compromise your professional image. The silence that followed was so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was deeper. Dad, I know I said some inappropriate things at the wedding. I was nervous. I'd had too much to drink. It wasn't my intention to offend you. The apology was partial and insufficient, but it revealed he had been thinking about the incident. However, he mentioned nothing about the subsequent lies Chloe had told me about, nor the systematic name change on his professional and personal profiles. Adam, I said, with the firmness I had learned over decades of raising a son. Words have consequences. They can't be erased with apologies of convenience when a financial need arises. But you're my father, he insisted with a note of desperation that felt familiar. It was the same tone he used as a child when he wanted Linda to intercede, to soften my disciplinary decisions. Families help each other, regardless of any temporary differences that may arise. His choice of words caught my attention. He had turned the public humiliation of our name into temporary differences, a euphemism that minimized the gravity of his behavior. It was clear he still didn't fully grasp the dimension of the offense. I explained that my refusal was not motivated by personal resentment, but by educational principles. A man who is ashamed of his last name must be able to build his future without depending on the person who bears that name. If you consider the Miller name a social burden, the logical thing is to also reject financial support from a Miller. My argument was relentless but fair. I couldn't let him selectively use our family relationship, despising it in public when it suited his social ambitions, but turning to it in private when he needed money. It's not that simple, Adam protested. I work in a very competitive environment where family image influences professional opportunities. It's a practical matter, not a personal one. His response confirmed he still didn't recognize the fundamental error of his perspective. That's precisely why my answer is no. I told him, if your professional success requires denying my existence, you can't expect my help when that success falters. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Adam alternating between pleas, promises of a change in attitude, and attempts to negotiate loan terms. He proposed higher interest, shorter repayment terms, additional guarantees. But I held my position with the firmness I had developed over months of preparing for this moment. Finally, when he realized my refusal was definitive, his tone shifted to something closer to indignation. I don't understand your attitude, Dad. After everything I did for you when Mom was sick, when I had to come from New York to help with the doctors and the hospital paperwork. The reference to Linda hurt, but it also strengthened my resolve. Adam had fulfilled basic son's duties during his mother's illness, but that didn't grant him a perpetual license to humiliate her memory by despising the name she had proudly carried for 30 years of marriage. Your mother would have helped you without hesitation, I acknowledged, but your mother also wouldn't have tolerated you denying her name in public to impress strangers. Linda Scott became Linda Scott Miller when she married me, and she was proud of that name until the day she died. Adam tried one last resort. If you won't do it for me, do it for Chloe. She's not to blame for any of this, and she's going through a tough time with the job change. It was a smart move. He knew my soft spot for his wife. It's precisely because I value Chloe, I replied. Okay, then I think it's important for her to learn what kind of man she chose as a husband. Lessons in character cannot be postponed indefinitely. When he hung up, after a tense and formal goodbye, I stood motionless in the workshop for several minutes. The conversation had been emotionally exhausting, but also liberating. I had maintained the necessary firmness, without resorting to disproportionate reproaches or hurtful personal attacks. That afternoon, I worked with renewed intensity in the workshop, channeling the emotional tension into tasks requiring technical concentration. Manual labor had always served as therapy for me to process complex emotional situations. Every movement of the sandpaper, every pass of the plane, every turn of the screwdriver gradually calmed me until I regained my inner balance. During my usual solitary dinner, I reflected on the next stages of this family crisis, which had evolved exactly as I had anticipated. Adam had exhausted the first option of superficial reconciliation based on partial apologies and immediate financial needs. His next move would likely be more desperate. Arthur's inheritance continued to generate regular income, accumulating in bank accounts, while I maintained my usual modest life. Each monthly transfer reminded me of the central irony of this situation. My son was asking to borrow $5,000 from someone who possessed over $10 million, precisely because he had despised the name that would have given him access to that fortune. His sentimental education was about to be completed with revelations that would forever transform his understanding of the real value of family names. The change began a week after the failed phone call. For the first time in months, Adam started posting different content on his social media. A photograph of the old neighborhood appeared, taken from somewhere high up, captioned, "Chicago will always be my true home, even if life has taken me far away." It was a calculated message to demonstrate reconnection with his origins, but it maintained enough ambiguity not to compromise his professional image in New York. A few days later, he posted an old picture of Linda in her kitchen with the caption, "Missing my mom's lentils. Some flavors just can't be replaced." Adam's strategy also included indirect attempts at rapprochement through third parties. Larry mentioned he had received a call from New York asking about my health and general financial situation. "Your son seemed worried. Said he noticed you've been quieter than usual lately." Paula Scott also informed me of a similar contact. Adam had called asking if I needed help with medical appointments or bureaucratic paperwork related to my widower status. He was clearly exploring alternative ways to gauge my willingness for an eventual reconciliation, but without committing to direct approaches. The most sophisticated move came through Chloe, who sent me a WhatsApp message requesting a private phone conversation. "Robert, I'd like to talk to you about Adam, but without him knowing. I think there are important things you should know." I agreed immediately, as I had always valued her honesty. "He's very upset by your refusal," Chloe began without beating around the bush. "Not just because of the money, but because of what it represents. I think for the first time, he's starting to truly understand the consequences of what he said at the wedding." She told me Adam had spent sleepless nights, looking through old family photographs he kept on his phone. Chloe also revealed that the financial situation was more complex than Adam had admitted during our conversation. "We've accumulated excessive expenses trying to maintain a standard of living we really can't afford. Expensive dinners to impress clients, designer clothes for professional events, weekend trips to keep up the image of success. But there's something more important." Chloe continued. "He started talking about the possibility of moving back to Chicago. He says New York is proving more stressful than he expected, that he misses the calmness of the Midwest, that maybe he made a mistake by moving so far from family. Honestly, it would make me happy," Chloe admitted when I asked her opinion. "I've never felt completely comfortable in New York. People are more superficial. Social relationships are more calculated. Everything revolves around work and money. In Chicago, we had genuine friends, a more relaxed social life, a better balance." During the conversation, a particularly relevant detail emerged. Chloe told me Adam had begun to discreetly research the Linda Scott Miller Foundation, trying to identify the anonymous donor who had funded it. "He's obsessed with that story. He says it must be someone who knew your wife. Maybe an old client of yours who became wealthy. Have you considered telling him the truth about your financial situation?" Chloe asked me directly. The question caught me off guard as I wasn't sure how much she had inferred about my real circumstances. "Robert, I know there have been significant changes in your life over the past few months. The neighbors are talking." I explained that I had received a small inheritance from a distant relative, enough to improve my situation, but not to solve other people's financial problems. It was a partial truth, satisfying her curiosity without revealing information that could prematurely reach Adam's ears. That's precisely why I'm being discreet about it, I explained. If Adam knew I had financial resources, his approach to me would be motivated by material interest, not by genuine recognition of his mistakes. I prefer any reconciliation to come from genuine reflection. At the end of the conversation, Chloe asked me to reconsider my attitude toward Adam, arguing he was showing genuine signs of remorse and reflection. I'm not asking you to give him money, but maybe you could offer him some sign that the relationship can be repaired if he demonstrates real changes in his behavior. Tell him I am willing to rebuild our relationship when he proves he truly values the Miller name, not just when he needs help from a Miller, I replied. That night, after the conversation with Chloe, I made a decision I had been postponing for weeks. It was time to accelerate the educational process to create a situation that would force Adam to directly confront the contradictions of his behavior. I contacted Patricia Morgan to discuss organizing a public event for the foundation that would generate significant media coverage. I want it to be something memorable, I explained. An event that demonstrates the institution's social impact and attracts regional and national media attention. Patricia suggested organizing a benefit gala at the Civic Opera House, attended by political figures, local business leaders, and representatives of social organizations. We could invite the mayor to present an official recognition to the foundation, get coverage from WGN and major Midwestern newspapers. The date for the gala was set for the last Saturday of April. Invitations were sent to a select list of 100 personalities. The media confirmed full coverage, and the program included the presentation of a special recognition to the anonymous benefactor who has transformed the lives of dozens of Chicago families. I would attend as a special guest, officially maintaining my anonymity, but prepared to reveal my identity at the ceremony's climax. It was the perfect setting to show Adam that the Miller name had generated social recognition, community impact, and public respect. The Thursday before the gala, Adam called me, his voice especially humble. Dad, I know we've had our differences, but I'd like to come to Chicago this weekend. I want to talk to you face to face. Apologize properly. Try to repair what's broken between us. The request came with perfect timing for my plans. That sounds good, I replied, but I want you to understand that serious conversations require complete honesty. No more half-truths or convenient excuses. He accepted the conditions without hesitation. Saturday would be a memorable day for both of us, though for different reasons than he imagined. The final lesson of this family crisis was about to begin, and I had all the necessary elements to make it definitive and unforgettable. Arthur's inheritance had provided me with the perfect teaching tools. Now I just had to use them at the right time and place, so that Adam would understand, perhaps too late, the true value of the name he had chosen to despise. Adam arrived on Friday afternoon driving a rental car from O'Hare Airport. I saw him approaching from the workshop window. He walked more slowly than usual, his shoulders slightly slumped, carrying a small suitcase. His appearance had subtly changed since the wedding. He was still dressed elegantly, but he had lost that arrogant confidence that characterized his movements in previous months. I opened the door without unnecessary drama, with the serenity I had cultivated during these months of emotional preparation. "Hi, Dad," he said, and in those two words, I sensed a vulnerability I hadn't detected since his adolescence. I invited him in, offered him coffee, asked about his trip, and about Chloe, with the formal courtesy one extends to important but distant visitors. "Dad, I want to apologize," he began when we sat in the small living room where Linda used to watch her afternoon soaps. "Not just for what I said at the wedding, but for everything that's happened since. I've behaved like a coward and an ungrateful son." His speech sounded rehearsed, but the tears that began to well up in his eyes seemed genuine. I listened to his full confession without interruption. He told me about the social pressure he felt in New York, the insecurity that colleagues from wealthy families caused him, the irrational shame he had developed for our modest origins. "It's not that I was really ashamed of you or Mom," he explained. "I was ashamed of myself for not being born into a family that would make my professional path easier." "And what about the lies afterward?" I asked him directly. "Chloe told me, you've been inventing stories about your family origin to impress your superiors." His face fell slightly. She told you? I was hoping to explain it to you myself. I confirmed I knew the details of his personal reinvention in New York, including the systematic name change on social media and professional documents. That behavior hurts me more than the wedding toast, I explained. A public offense can be a momentary mistake. Systematically lying about your family identity is a sustained betrayal. Adam sank into the sofa as if the weight of his decisions had physically materialized on his shoulders. You're right. I've built a false version of myself to impress people who, honestly, probably wouldn't respect me more even if I were a banker's son. It's pathetic. For the first time during the conversation, his remorse sounded completely genuine, devoid of tactical calculations on how to regain my support. The question is, I said, what do you plan to do now with that false version you've built? I want to undo it, he replied without hesitation. I want to get the Miller name back on all my profiles, correct the lies I've told about our origins, prove publicly that I'm proud to be your son. His words sounded convincing, but I had a more demanding test prepared to evaluate the depth of his transformation. I'm glad to hear you say that, Adam, because tomorrow you'll have the perfect opportunity to prove it. I explained that I had been invited to the gala for the Linda Scott Miller Foundation at the Civic Opera House. The foundation that helps workers' families? He asked, surprised. How did you get an invitation to such an exclusive event? I explained that I had connections in the local carpentry world, that some aid beneficiaries were old colleagues. I'd like you to accompany me, I proposed. It will be an opportunity for you to see how one can generate social respect without denying family origins. The proposal visibly excited him. I'd love to go with you. It could be a way to show publicly that I'm not ashamed of being part of a worker's family. There's one condition, I added. I want you to use your full name during the entire evening. Adam Miller Scott. No hiding, no half-truths. He immediately agreed to the condition. He even suggested we could use the occasion to introduce him to professional contacts in Chicago. During the dinner I prepared that night, lentils with sausage, Linda's recipe, the conversation flowed with a naturalness we hadn't experienced since before his move to New York. Adam told me details about the pressures at work, the difficulties of social adjustment, the loneliness he had felt far from his familiar family environment. Ambition blinded me, he admitted, savoring the lentils. I thought professional success would compensate for any personal sacrifice, but I've discovered that success without authentic roots is hollow, unsatisfying. Your mother would have been proud to hear you talk like that, I said, and I saw his eyes moisten again. After dinner, we took out family photo albums we had stored after Linda's funeral. Adam looked at the pictures with renewed attention as if seeing them for the first time. One particular photograph caught his eye. It was from his college graduation, Linda and I flanking him holding the diploma with a proud expression. Do you know what hurts me most about this picture? He asked. That you both are more proud of my achievement than I was. I was already thinking about the next step, about impressing future employers. You were just happy to see me succeed. That's unconditional love, I explained. Parents celebrate their children's successes without expecting recognition. But when those children grow up and reject us to impress strangers, the pain is proportional to the love invested. Adam nodded with a grave expression. I understand now why my request for money upset you so much. It wasn't just the loan. It was the hypocrisy of disowning you in public and turning to you in private when it suited me. Saturday dawned clear with that golden Midwestern spring light that makes Chicago look like a postcard. During breakfast, Adam asked me details about the gala. What kind of people would be there if I personally knew the foundation's anonymous donor? I answered with general information, carefully hiding the details that would turn the evening into a devastating revelation. I just ask you to keep an open mind, I warned him. Some things you'll discover tonight might surprise you. In the mid-afternoon, we began to get ready for the gala. Adam dressed in an elegant dark suit, crisp white shirt, sober tie. I chose my best suit, the same one I had worn for my wedding to Linda 30 years earlier. Before leaving for the Civic Opera House, I stopped by the workshop to pick up an envelope I had prepared in the preceding weeks. It contained documents related to Arthur's inheritance, photographs of the Massachusetts properties, financial statements, and a personal letter to Adam explaining the reasons for my silence. The final moment of truth had arrived, and I was prepared for all its consequences. The gala would become the perfect stage to complete my son's sentimental education, demonstrating to him irreversibly the true value of the name he had chosen to despise. The Civic Opera House glittered under the night lights when we arrived by taxi at 8 p.m. The neoclassical facade was lit with special spotlights for the occasion, and a red carpet stretched from the main entrance to the curb, where photographers from various media outlets captured the arrival of notable guests. Adam observed the scene with a fascinated expression, clearly impressed by the scale of the event. "I didn't imagine a charity foundation could organize something so elegant," he commented as we got out of the car. "The anonymous donor must have invested a considerable fortune in this gala." A hostess asked for our invitations at the entrance. I presented the 2 passes I had specially requested, printed on high-quality paper with the foundation's emblem and gold relief. "Mr. Miller," the hostess read, checking her list, "you have a table reserved in the VIP section. Please follow the usher." Adam looked at me with renewed surprise. "VIP table? Dad, I didn't know you had such influential contacts in these circles." I vaguely explained that the organizers had valued my contribution as a representative of the Chicago artisan community. The interior of the theater had been transformed for the occasion. The main floor seating had been reconfigured with elegantly decorated rounds, each seating 8 people. The side boxes held political figures and prominent business leaders, while the main stage featured a large screen projecting images of the foundation's beneficiaries. Our table was located in the front row with a direct view of the stage. Our tablemates included the director of a major Chicago construction firm, the president of the Downtown Business Association, a journalist specializing in social issues, and a philanthropic couple known for funding local cultural projects. Adam introduced himself to everyone as Adam Miller Scott, financial consultant, using his full name, just as we had agreed. His behavior was impeccable, polite, genuinely interested in the conversations, showing authentic respect for the foundation's goals. During the pre-dinner cocktail hour, Adam took the opportunity to make professional contacts potentially useful for his eventual return to Chicago. He exchanged business cards with several entrepreneurs, discussed financial collaboration opportunities, and demonstrated solid knowledge of the Midwestern markets. "I'm considering moving back to my hometown," he explained to those who asked about his current job situation. At 9 o'clock sharp, an elegant chime announced the start of the official ceremony. The mayor took the stage to give the opening speech, highlighting the importance of private initiatives that complement public social policies. "The Linda Scott Miller Foundation represents the best of Chicago solidarity," he declared to enthusiastic applause. Patricia Morgan followed him as president of the foundation. She presented a detailed report on the activities carried out during the first year of operation. The figures were impressive: 53 university scholarships granted, 26 interest-free loans for family workshops, 34 medical grants provided, and over 200 families directly benefited. All of this has been possible thanks to the vision and generosity of one person who prefers to remain anonymous, Patricia explained. But tonight he has exceptionally agreed to reveal his identity to pay public tribute to the memory of Linda Scott Miller. The climactic moment had arrived. Patricia invited me to the stage with a discreet gesture that only I perceived from my seat. I stood up slowly, feeling Adam's confused gaze and the growing attention of the guests, who wondered who this older man walking toward the main podium was. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia announced into the microphone, "I have the honor of introducing the benefactor of the Linda Scott Miller Foundation, Mr. Robert Miller." The silence that followed was absolute. From the stage, I could see Adam's face, which had gone completely pale as he understood the implications of what he was witnessing. I took the microphone with hands that trembled slightly, but with a voice that came out firm and clear. "Good evening. A year ago, I lost the most important woman in my life, Linda Scott Miller, whose name this foundation bears. A few months later, I received an unexpected inheritance from my great-uncle, Arthur Miller, a Massachusetts businessman who built a considerable fortune over 4 decades of honest work." I paused deliberately, allowing Adam to process the information he was receiving. That inheritance amounted to $10.4 million. The murmur of surprise that rippled through the theater was audible even from the stage. I continued. I decided to allocate a significant portion of those resources to helping families like mine, manual laborers who build this city with daily effort. My gaze went directly to Adam, who remained motionless in his chair, his expression a combination of astonishment, painful understanding, and something that looked like deep shame. The Miller name, I continued, has been a source of pride for my family for generations. My great-uncle Arthur immigrated to Massachusetts when he was very young, worked as a mason, saved every dime, invested wisely, and built a respectable real estate empire. He was never ashamed of his humble origins. He transformed them into business strength. The final revelation came with surgical precision. Unfortunately, not all members of my family have properly valued what it means to carry this name. 10 months ago, during a family celebration, I heard my only son publicly declare that he had always hated being named Miller, that he was ashamed of our origin. The silence in the theater was deafening. That night, I decided that whoever rejects a last name does not deserve to benefit from a fortune that name has generated. Adam had buried his head in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking almost imperceptibly. That is why I created this foundation, I continued, to demonstrate that the Miller name can generate social recognition, community impact, and public respect. To teach that the value of a name is not measured by the money that accompanies it, but by the integrity of those who carry it. I concluded with words aimed directly at my son. A last name is a responsibility, not a burden. It represents those who came before and commits those who will come after. If someone considers it dead weight, they must be prepared to live without the benefits that weight has generated over decades of family work. The applause that followed was long and emotional, but I only watched Adam, who finally lifted his gaze to the stage, tears streaming down his cheeks. I walked off the stage amidst congratulations from organizers and guests, but my attention was fully focused on returning to the table. Adam had stood up and was waiting by his chair with an expression that mixed emotional devastation, delayed comprehension, and something that could be interpreted as painful admiration. When I reached his side, he said nothing. He just hugged me with desperate force and whispered in my ear, "Dad, forgive me. I've been a complete idiot." The gala continued with award presentations and beneficiary testimonials, but we remained in silence, processing the implications of the revelation that had just forever transformed our family relationship. Adam had discovered that the name he despised had funded the institution he admired, that his carpenter father was a millionaire by inheritance. The lesson was complete, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. A year and a half after that gala that changed our lives, I am writing these lines from the terrace of my new apartment in downtown Chicago. The view spans the city rooftops, fading into the golden horizon of the Midwestern sunset. The Linda Scott Miller Foundation has grown into a nationally recognized institution with branches in 3 states, and more than 400 families benefited. Adam returned to Chicago permanently 6 months after the revelation at the theater. The process was not immediate. It required complicated work negotiations, bureaucratic hurdles to transfer his job, and above all, a profound exercise in humility to rebuild relationships he had damaged. The New York firm agreed to transfer him to their Chicago office with a 30% pay cut, a condition he accepted without protest. I'd rather earn less money being authentic than maintain a high salary playing a fake character, he told me during one of our reconciliation talks. Our authentic family reunion began gradually, building trust on more solid foundations than those that had existed during his youth. Adam insisted on working weekends in the workshop, learning carpentry techniques he had disdained during his adolescence. "I want to truly understand what manual labor means," he'd explain, patiently sanding an uneven surface. "For years, I thought it was inferior to my office job. Now I see it requires skill, patience, and precision that I don't possess." Watching him concentrate on the wood, repeating gestures I had mastered over decades, filled me with the renewed paternal satisfaction. Chloe adapted to the change with genuine enthusiasm. The return to Chicago gave her back the peace she had lost in New York, where she had felt constantly judged by superficial social standards she didn't share. I can finally be myself without fearing it will harm Adam's career, she confessed to me during a family dinner. She found a job at a local cultural foundation, work that brought her more personal satisfaction than her previous roles in marketing consulting. I made the most significant decision during the fall of 2025. After months of observing Adam's authentic transformation, I decided to gradually incorporate him into the management of the family inheritance, not as an undeserved gift, but as recognition of his personal growth and demonstrated commitment to the values that had built Arthur's fortune. He began by volunteering at the foundation, getting to know individual cases, participating in application evaluations, understanding from inside the social impact of the wealth he had once despised. His financial expertise proved valuable in optimizing the investments that sustained the charitable activities. "Dad, I need to ask you something important," he said one afternoon as we reviewed the foundation's annual accounts together. "Will you ever be able to completely forgive me for what I did, or will there always be a scar between us?" His question moved me with its vulnerable honesty. "Adam," I replied, "forgiveness doesn't erase wounds, but it allows them to heal correctly. What matters isn't forgetting the past, but building a future where those mistakes have served a positive purpose." In the spring, when the foundation celebrated its second anniversary, Adam gave a public speech that filled me with paternal pride. "2 years ago," he declared to the media, "I believed success meant escaping my origins, denying the family history that had shaped me. I learned in the hardest way possible that true success means honoring where you come from while building toward where you are going." Chloe and Adam announced in the summer that they were expecting their first child. The news moved me deeply, not just at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, but because it represented family continuity, rebuilt on solid values. "We want our son to grow up knowing the complete history of the Miller family," they told me. They decided to name him Arthur in honor of the great-uncle whose inheritance had transformed our lives. The carpentry workshop continues to operate, though now more as a personal passion than a financial necessity. I still accept special commissions that motivate me technically, but I've turned down routine jobs that no longer stimulate me. Adam has expressed interest in learning the trade seriously, not as a hobby, but as a complementary professional skill. "I want my son to know that his grandfather was capable of creating beauty with his hands in addition to managing millions of dollars," he explains. Arthur's inheritance continues to grow thanks to prudent investments and competent professional management. A substantial part continues to fund the foundation, but I have begun to diversify the social impact by creating a university scholarship fund specifically for the children of carpenters, plumbers, electricians, and other manual trades. During the quiet afternoons, I go up to visit Linda's grave at St. Ferdinand Cemetery. I tell her the family news. I describe Adam's evolution. I explain how we're using Arthur's inheritance for purposes she would have completely approved of. Our son learned his lesson. I whisper to the granite where her ashes rest. It took longer than we'd like, but he finally understood what we tried to teach him. The Miller name, carried with pride, inherited, not imposed. He will grow up hearing stories about his great-grandfather Arthur, who immigrated with empty pockets and built an empire, about his grandmother Linda, who held the family together with unconditional love, about his grandfather Robert, who transformed an unexpected inheritance into social hope, and about his father Adam, who made serious mistakes but had the courage to recognize and correct them. This story began with public humiliation and ended with private reconciliation. But its true value lies in the lessons in between. I learned that the deepest paternal love is not always the most permissive, that some lessons require time and distance to be effective, and that patient education can generate more lasting transformations than immediate confrontations. Adam learned that escaping family origins is impossible and counterproductive, that personal authenticity is more valuable than artificial social approval, and that last names loaded with history are privileges to be honored, not burdens to be abandoned. When I hold the green-covered notebook, where I documented every stage of this crisis, I feel a deep satisfaction for having maintained the necessary firmness without losing essential compassion. The pages tell the story of a father who chose to teach instead of punish, who used unexpected resources to create memorable lessons, who turned a material inheritance into a sentimental education. The Miller name will continue for future generations, carried by descendants who will know its complete history. The glories and the shames, the triumphs and the errors, the inheritances received and the responsibilities assumed. Linda would be proud of this outcome, and Arthur would have approved of the use we have given his fortune. We Millers have finally learned to honor our name. If you like this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thanks for watching.